Hello everybody, we are Group 32. Our topic today is Colonization and Decolonization, the influence on the Third World and the development problems post-World War II. We divided our videos into 5 parts. What is decolonization? What factors led to decolonization? What are cultural, economic, and political impacts of decolonization? How Third World emerged? And lastly, what are some examples of decolonization influence to the Third World?
So what is decolonization? Decolonization is the undoing of colonialism. It is the process whereby a nation establishes and maintains its domination of overseas territories. The concept particularly applies to the dismantlement during the second half of the 20th century of the colonial empires established prior to World War I throughout the world. Colonization takes many forms, from the literal appropriation of lands to cultural globalization, from political manipulation and armed intervention to modern versions of economic enslavement. So what are the factors that led to decolonization? After the World War II, European countries lacked the wealth and political support necessary to suppress faraway revolts. They also faced opposition from the new superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, both of which had taken positions against colonialism. So because of that, between the 1945 and 1960, 36 new states in Asia and Africa achieved autonomy or outright independence from the European colonial rulers. It leads to the strong independence movements in colony. So what are cultural, economic, and political impacts of decolonization? The colonial rule drew arbitrary natural boundaries, dividing ethnic and linguistic groups and natural features, and laying the foundation for the creation of numerous states lacking geographic, linguistic, ethnic, or political affinity. The US and European world studied democratization of these countries. The Soviet Union deployed a similar effort to encourage new nations to join the communist bloc. Some adopted capitalism, like Malaysia or Indonesia, while others chose socialism, like India and Egypt. In terms of independent foreign policy, they enacted a non-aligned movement that started in 1955 to focus on internal development. It also raised neo-colonialism, which is the practice of using capitalism, globalization, and cultural forces to control new countries. The dependency principle evolved, which claimed that post-colonial states have no choice but to accept Western conditions for loans because they desperately need the money to support their own domestic policies. And the population resettlements, like the relocation of Jews in Palestine and Sikh and Muslims in border areas of India and in Pakistan, raised conflictual problems. So how did the Third World emerge? The independence movement led to the emergence of a series of countries that did not belong to the Western Bloc or the Soviet Bloc. These countries had various features in common, including underdevelopment and rapid demographic growth, and they became known collectively as the Third World. African states suffered from a variety of economic and political problems. One of the most pressing challenges African states faced at independence was their lack of infrastructure. European imperialists prided themselves on bringing civilization and developing Africa, but they left their former colonies with little in the way of infrastructure. The lack of infrastructure also meant that African countries were dependent on Western economies for much of their energy. Even oil-rich countries did not have the refineries needed to turn their crude oil into gasoline or heating oil. At independence, there were several presidents like Jomo Kenyatta had several decades of political experience, but others like Tanzania Julius had entered the political fray just years before independence. There was also a distinct lack of trained and experienced civil leadership. The borders Africa's new countries were left with were the one drawn in Europe during the scramble of Africa with no regard to the ethnic or social landscape on the ground. The subject of these colonies often had many identities and trumped their sense of being, for example, the Canadian or the Congolese. The most famous case of this was the Belgian policies that crystallized the divisions between Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda that led to the tragic genocide in 1994. Decolonization coincided with the Cold War, which presented another challenge for African states. The push and pull between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics made non-aligned a difficult, if not possible, option. These combined challenges made it difficult to establish strong economies or political stability in Africa and contributed to the upheaval that many states faced between the late 60s and the late 90s.
In this part, we will talk about the India decolonization. Firstly, we will talk about the partition of India. In August 1947, after 300 years in India, the British finally left and the subcontinent was partitioned into two independent nation states, the Hindu-majority India and the Muslim-majority Pakistan. Immediately, they began one of the greatest migrations in human history as millions of Muslims streaked to West and East Pakistan, later known as Bangladesh, while millions of Hindus and Sikhs head in the opposite direction. Many hundreds of thousands never made it. Across the Indian subcontinent, communities that had coexisted for more a millennium year attacked each other in a terrifying outbreak. Hindus and Sikhs on one side and Muslims on the other side. A mutual genocide as unexpected as it was unpredicted. By 1948, as the Great Migration drew to a close, more than 15 million people have been unrooted, and between 1 and 2 million were dead. After the Second World War, Britain simply no longer had the resource which to control its greatest imperial asset, and its exit from India was messy, hasty, and clumsily improvised. So in the second part, we will talk about the changes during India decolonization period. Transportation and communication was one huge key in the development of India. This made it much easier to move goods around the country and promote industry. Gandhi believed that India should not trust the power of the state. As stated above, British rule was overbearing attempt to India. He believed that self-control was the only way for the citizens of India to live. Gandhi was encouraging all individuals of Indian society to revolt against their own government. Gandhi was inspired to overthrow Britain by Hinduism and the rebellious Western cultures that disagree with the industrialization in India. Gandhi's non-violent resistance acts was famous. He believed in civil disobedience and non-cooperation. It was the victory of Indian nationalists. Among them, Gandhi had dreamed of. Gandhi and Nehru both share the view that India must change after the independence is won. So in the last part, we will talk about the difficulties of India decolonization and the national movement. India had now to rethink and build up the country's pride and democracy. Nehru, India's Prime Minister at the time, believed in a self-reliant economy, but did not want to disregard the idea of international trade. One of the biggest ideas that contributed to the decolonization of India was the national movement. The Indian National Congress was founded in 1885 and was one of the biggest political aspects during the national movement based on democratic ideas. The Congress voted on many ideas of Gandhi, such as the non-cooperation movement in 1920s. The National Congress supported and encouraged the opinions of individuals from all different ranks and all different minorities. This was important to India and helped contribute to the change that was yet to come. Gandhi and Nehru are the basic to which many leaders are compared after the huge impact they made on the decolonization of India.